Welcome, everybody, to February session of Reading Pilgrimage 2026. This is our first dive into one of the books. So we started last month rather, with an introduction to the series as a whole and a little discussion with Scott McCracken, who is one of the experts on all things pilgrimagey, and Richardsonite. So. This month, we'll be looking at pointed roofs. I'll start with just a little presentation, hopefully not too long, and then we have our special guest for this month's discussion, Dr. Becky Bowler from Keele University. So, without further ado, so we're doing Pointed Roofs, which is the first chapter volume of Pilgrimage. And for those of you who are coming to Pilgrimage for the first time, it is, I'd say, overall an excellent way to get started because it's a relatively narrowly confined time frame and setting, and it's an opportunity to get used to Dorothy Richardson's particular voice. So as I mentioned, joining us again because she joined our 2022 sessions and contributed in a wonderful way. And I have to say, one of the great things about this experience in 2022, and I'm sure it will be this time around as well, is the participation of Richardson scholars from all over the place. So just as a reminder, you're here undoubtedly because you've signed up for the email list that's on readingpilgrimage.com. This has all the material that was put together for the 2022 session. Some of this stuff I will continue or repeat sending out each month with each book. But a lot of the material I'm not going to repeat as much. We have the first recording available on YouTube from January session. And so this will start a playlist. If you go to my Neglected Books channel on YouTube, you will find that the playlist of all the 2022 sessions are available as well. Just so we just have one now, but there'll be more to join it. And so we're talking today about book one, Pointed Roofs, published in 1915. Interesting time to be publishing. We would certainly say this was a pioneering modernist work. In terms of the timeline, this is focusing actually on a relatively narrow period of time. It probably, if you go by George Thompson's dates, it's covering March to June-ish of 1893. As I mentioned in our first discussion, these dates in Miriam Henderson's life are sort of offset a little bit from the corresponding dates that were reflected in Dorothy Richardson's own experience. So she went to Germany and taught earlier in the 1890s. So it's our first exposure, the first words of it, and a wonderful entry, in media res, as it's sometimes put, where Miriam at home in outside London and getting ready to go out into the world in her first expedition to make money and also to sort of figure out what it is she wants to be and what she wants to do with her life. So as we follow her journey in the first couple of chapters, she travels with her father, taking the night boat from Harwich to Rotterdam, and then by train across the Netherlands to Hanover in Germany, which is where she uh, comes into this interesting world. I mean, it's a new exposure for her. The architecture, as implied by the title of the books, Pointed Roofs, quite different from what she's been used to in England. And this is just a sample. Hanover, like many European towns, had both old cities, Altstadt, as they say in German, and newer imperialist German architecture. And the latter we see in this view of a street that she travels up and is mentioned a number of times in the book, which is Georgerstrasse, which is sort of the main shopping street. That this is where they go to Cripes to have uh, chocolata, which Miriam, of course, finds is the best thing that she's ever tasted in her life, and of course, luxuriant German pastries as well. Miriam becomes a teacher at Fräulein Pfaff's school. This is the fictional counterpart to the school where Dorothy Richardson taught in the early 1890s, Fräulein Lily Pop's Institute at number 13 Maderstrasse in Hanover. Uh, it is, I have to say, seeing this is the only photo I've ever seen of this, and as I've already mentioned, one of the things we really suffer from with when it comes to Richardson is the lack of photographic evidence overall. But I do find this, it's hard sometimes to picture, to correspond the fictional account of the school with what I see from the shot, unless there's a luxuriant garden in the back that we just don't have evidence of. Oops, sorry. I made the mistake of shutting that off. But we're almost done with that. Let me just go back here and share again. Okay. Oh, I was pretty much done, and the slides knew that better than I did. So we'll talk about that our next month session on our special guest for that. But with that, let me turn it over to Becky Bowler, who has something that she wants to share with us, and then we'll open it up as we'll do pretty consistently throughout the next year. Discussions about your reactions to the book, questions, and of course, tapping the brains of our wonderful Richardson scholars.
And it would be helpful if I unmuted myself as well. Thanks, Brett. I'm very excited to be here for the very first volume, chapter volume. I very much enjoyed the reading group last year, the sessions that I made it to, but also listening back to the ones that I didn't. And so it feels quite special to be kicking it off. Um, Especially because Pointed Roofs is just such a wonderful volume. They're all wonderful. I said this to Brad when we corresponded about it. I said, I love every single volume, so I don't mind where you put me. So Brad said, great, go first. I've got a few slides. They're not uh, kind of laid out as a lecture necessarily. It's just a few things that I thought were interesting that I wanted to draw your attention to. The title slide has got a contemporary picture of Hanover that I just stole from the internet to give you an idea of what it looks like now. Sadly, Hanover was very extensively bombed in the Second World War. And a lot of the streets and buildings that Richardson would have seen when she was there are not there anymore. So you just do not have the same kind of um, density of pointed roofs as you would have had in her time. It also means that the school that she taught at is no longer there. I went to Hanover in 2018. I went on a little pilgrimage, and we went along the street, which is more or less, but not entirely, on the actual same plot as the street used to be. It's slightly diverted. There is a school there, more or less where her school was, but it's a contemporary primary school with a flat roof and children's illustrations stuck up in the window. So a very different kind of
Excuse me,
vibe.
Rebecca. Yeah, could I'm having a lot of trouble hearing. Could you just speak up a little louder, please?
Yes, or let me just have a look at my settings because um, it is sometimes, yeah, okay, I'm turning myself up. Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Great. That's my computer being strange. Um, Okay, so as Brad said, as with all of Pilgrimage, the novel is more or less autobiographical. The more or less becomes more complicated the more you look into it. But obviously, Richardson herself is the third daughter of four, and Miriam is the third daughter of four. So the family home at the very beginning that becomes clear. You've got the oldest, Frances Kate, and then Alice Mary. of what's known as Richie, and then Dorothy Miller, and then Jessie Abbott's the youngest, who become Sarah, Eve, Miriam, and Harriet. Harriet being the favourite sister, so she's the one who gets engaged at the end, but also the one who she spends most time with when she's back home. When Miriam goes to Waldstrasse to teach with Lily Paff. That was Dorothy Richardson actually went to Merterstrasse to teach with Lily Pabst. The name changes are minimal. Same initials, same first names. Some are more disguised than others. Which then, by contrast, just a sneak peek ahead to next week when she goes to teach in North London. She teaches at Edgeworth House in real life, and it becomes Wordsworth House. The Eyre sisters become the Pern sisters. So she's slightly changing things. She's often using the same initials. She's sometimes playing with ideas like, for example, Wordsworth and Edgeworth are both poets. So she's playing thematically with the idea of names. But she's playing around. She's playing around with the idea of memoir. She's playing around with the idea of Bildungsroman. We can't read all of these things straight as biography. That said, when I went to Hanover in 2018, one of the reasons why I went was because the Krypers scene is my favourite scene of the novel. Everybody being so exciting, so excited about going and having cake and having hot chocolate, and then coming home and realizing that actually they're being judged for the amount of cake that they ate. It felt very relatable. It felt very fun, and her descriptions of the food were very good. And I, in doing some research just into the geography of Hanover, found that the cafe still exists. And you can look that up online, have a little tour around. It's got very good reviews on TripAdvisor, you'll be glad to know. And there's a picture of one of the cakes that you can have. So we went. This is a photo of the newspaper clipping that they have framed in the actual cafe now. So that's a picture of the old building. So this is sadly one of the casualties of the Second World War. The actual building in Georgstrasse, where Krypers was, is flattened. So they're in a new build, kind of mid-century street with lots of chrome and glass, and it's all very nice and very fancy, but it's not quite as old as it was. But it's the same family business they maintain, so there's a consistency there in terms of the vision, I suppose, for the cake and how good the cake is. So
And I'm sure they still serve chocolate with massive. Okay, there you go.
there it
Yes,
is.
good German fashion, the massive amounts of cream on top.
This is my excuse to show you some holiday photos. There I am in Krypers with my chocolate, with the hillock of cream, which is the phrase that they use. I desperately wanted a gooseberry tart because that's what Miriam eats. But the closest was this blueberry tart, which at least had the fruit standing out, shiny and glazed on the top. I went back another day and had a strawberry tart in a similar fashion. I can confirm that the chocolate was extremely good. And I went with another Richardson scholar as well. So we had a great time, took a lot of photos. So here's the quotations, sitting at a little marble topped table. God, my face is covering the words. With the Bergmans near the window and overlooking the full flood of Georgstrasse, Miriam felt a keen renewal of the sense of being abroad. Here she sat in the little enclosure of this upper room above a shop full of strange delicatessens securely adrift. Behind her she felt not home but the German school where she belonged. Here they all sat, free. She heard German laughter about the room. The sounds excited her, and she watched eagerly for laughing faces. They were different. The laughter sounded differently, and the laughing faces were different. The eyes were expressionless as they laughed, or evil. They had that same knowing way of laughing as though everything were settled, but they did not pretend to be refined as English women did. They had the same horridness, but they were jolly. They could shout if they liked. 3 cups of thick-looking chocolate, each supporting a little hillock of solid cream, arrived at her table. Clara ordered cakes. At the first sip, taken with lips that slid helplessly on the surprisingly thick ring of her cup, Miriam renounced all the beverages she had ever known as unworthy. She chose a familiar looking eclair. Clara and Emma ate cakes that seemed to be alternate slices of cream and a very spongy coffee coloured cake, and then followed Emma's lead with an open tartlet on which plump green gooseberries stood out in a thick brown syrup. Now, does that not make you absolutely starving? um,
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
so good. The other thing that I like about this passage, the entire scene in the cafe, is that you've simultaneously got a sense of Miriam enjoying herself, feeling the delights of foreign travel, feeling the pleasures of being somewhere unfamiliar, unfamiliar but delightful food, and also the unfamiliarity that comes from just national difference, her perceived sense of national difference, the ways in which she continually describes Germans as being different somehow. And we have to remember that with the period of time in between her being in Germany and her writing Pointed Roofs, obviously the First World War has begun, and national tensions are obviously very high. She occasionally refers to German men as having a military aspect or a military bearing, and that's a kind of reflection from present day Richardson, kind of, I don't know, refracted back onto her previous experience in lots of ways. But also gender. She thinks about gender here. She thinks about being free, being abroad, and being independent. One of these new class of independent women, being a teacher and being to some extent able to do what she wants, although she's not really able to do what she wants. And she looks around at other women and the ways in which they are performing a certain kind of sociability, the kind of laugh that they do, the kind of affect that they produce as they're talking to each other. And she just notes the differences between what she's observed with English women's sociabilities versus these German women. And there's a lot of that throughout Pointed Roofs. So maybe when we chat in a little bit, we can see if any of those struck you as being interesting.
Well, just to mention while we're on that page is that sentence where the word different appears three times, in close succession. They were different.
Mm,
The laughter sounded differently. The laughing faces were different. That's the sort of writing that any creative writing program instructor would say, you don't do that. You don't repeat that. And yet, it is sort of a little bit of Richardson's brilliance in the sense of putting us into Miriam's mind and putting us into that experience where, she doesn't have a thesaurus and she doesn't feel like the need to resort to a thesaurus just to keep from using the same word.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, she's still working it out. She's still working out
Yeah,
how they're different. She's not quite sure yet. So, and this is what we all do, right? In our minds, we think, well, it's different, different how. And she's not quite grasped it yet. So we see her in the process of working it out. There's all these ellipses as well, right? So,
yeah.
as this reading group progresses, you're going to get very familiar with the Richsonian ellipsis. But yeah, this particularly that kind of that final sentence, the em dashes and then the ellipses. Um, they did not pretend to be refined as English women did. Dot dot dot. They had the same horridness. Dot dot dot. But they were dot 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 jolly. Dot 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 because she's trying to work out what the word is. Is it jolly? Jolly is not the right word.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Again, very relatable, I think. Particularly, the 17-year-old who's just trying to work things out. Um, Speaking of ellipses, this is just by way of perfect nerdy interest. Just a couple of pages from the manuscript of Pointed Roofs, which, as Brad said, and I think Scott mentioned as well last in the last reading group, we don't have manuscripts for most of Richardson's novels. We've got this wonderfully fragmented, incomplete version of March Moonlight. Uh, there's some interim, isn't there? I think, but this is the Pointed Roofs from the Beinecke. in New Haven. There's a 5 dot ellipsis there, if you can spot that. Some
Right,
of it
about mid page, just below the
out in the
cross
middle.
outs.
Yeah. So I this is just, she's crossing this section out. Miriam awoke from a dream. Um, she's originally written, Miriam awoke to a clear certainty of failure. The staff of the German school that had seemed to stare last week. I think that's a stare. It's crossed out very heavily. So far away, so wonderful had suddenly appeared to her. They had dreadful eyes. By turns, the eyes of the principal at school, some of her puzzled hostesses as she had sat numb and silent at a party, and eyes she had seen in trains and shops and buses, 5 dots. The staff of the German teachers. Um, she then revises this. This is the only section that she inserts a page because she wants to revise it um, so completely. Miriam awoke from a dream. She had been standing in a room in the German school, and the staff had crowded round her and looking at her. They had the eyes of hostesses she remembered, eyes she had seen in trains and buses, eyes from the old school. They came and stood and looked at her and saw her as she was. Um, I always think it's interesting what sections authors revise most heavily. And in a lot of cases, I'm certainly finding this with Mason Clare, who's someone else that I work on. The sections that are the most heavily revised are the ones that they're the most anxious about, or the ones that they're most keen to get right. So something quite conceptual. Um, and when I was first studying Richardson, when I did my PhD, I was obsessed with this idea of eyes, which is the reason why I took these photos in the first place, and made sure I had copies of these pages, because it struck me that one of the things that Miriam is most concerned about all the way through is who is looking at her, how they are looking at her, and what they are seeing. So she's 17 years old. She's relatively naive. She's not especially sophisticated. She's anxious in public. She's not very good at performing sociability, but she's trying. And when she tries, she then looks at other people, looks at their faces, and tries to work out if she's pulled it off. Have I come across the way I wanted to come across? Have I come across like somebody else, like an ordinary
Right,
person?
right.
Do they think I'm weird?
I I was just rereading the passage where she's walking with Mademoiselle and some students, and I think down Georgstrasse to Cripes, but she's noticing how Mademoiselle is chatting away with the girls, and she's sort of saying, "I can't do that, and I won't do that."
They're just
Just
having
one
a
other thing while
conversation.
we're on this. Yeah, just one other thing while we're on this slide. You notice that this is from section 2 of a chapter, and I think that's something that was dropped with the dent and is gone from the Virago, which is the numbering of the sections.
Yeah, it is. And so it was in uh, the first edition. Ta-da. You can see that. I'm not sure where I'm holding it. um, and then Brad, you have brought it back for your edition, and Scott has brought it back for his edition as well, I believe. I find that a lot more helpful, especially when you're navigating the text. But also, it does make sense with the structure of Pointed Roofs, because the structure is relatively episodic, right? Oh God, and
Right.
actually, Brad, I wish I'd had your little synopses of each volume when I was doing my PhD, because that's so helpful. Honestly, the amount of
I
times that I'd been like, oh, I need this
I have
passage.
to say, I mean that it's liberally stolen from George Thompson as well as Scott's work on the first two books, and but it's also translated into ordinary. And I have to. That's the most what I have the most trepidation about is that I got something inaccurately in simplifying or whatever. I didn't want to be as thorough as Thompson is in his synopses.
or there might be something that somebody else thinks it's important, even though it's only an
Yeah.
aside or an anecdote, but you thought, oh, I'll leave that out because that's not really what she's dwelling on right now. But for someone else, that might be the thing that they're looking for. But yeah, no, I think it's really useful, and particularly you'll all be finding this as you go on with reading Pilgrimage. You know, when you get halfway through, you'll think, which volume was that in? And you'll be trying to remember, you know, did I read it when it was cold outside or was it warm at the time? Which side of the page is it on if you're flicking through and trying to find something? Um, Particularly when once she's in London. So for the first few volumes, it's relatively distinct because you think, okay, well, it happened in Germany, so it must be Pointed Roofs. It happened in North London, so it must be backwards. It happened when she was being a governess at this big fancy house, so it must be. So you know that makes sense. But when she's in London, some of the same characters are appearing, the same locations, some of the same themes as well. So it kind of it starts blending together a little bit more. Um, but yeah, really
I
interesting.
think just one other point while we're looking at this is one of the things I find fascinating is how much Richardson varied things like the length of chapters and the use of sections or the not how she broke up her work into elements because any writer who takes on a book length project, how you structure, how you break it into chapters, there are sort of like conventions, and especially the novel of that time sort of had conventions of what a typical chapter would be in terms of length, like, 3 or 5,000 words. You didn't see 10,000 word chapters. And Richardson has no problem with that if that seems to be what works for her.
Yeah. And it's the mood that it dictates often. So, you know, sometimes there will be short uh, sections that will, you know, just reflect on a moment in which she saw something or a moment that she remembered something. And then other sections will be longer because they'll be dealing with conversation and incident and it will be more of a set scene. Um, and they don't always happen in the right order as well. So you feel like you could maybe shuffle the papers if you had the manuscripts and it would come out in a different order in a different way. Um, so yeah, in the manuscript, just to this is a note I made at the time. There's quite a few of these name changes that in the manuscript she writes in a lot of cases the original name of the actual person that she knew in real life, and then at some point later she goes through and crosses them out and then writes the new name over the top. So Erika Hesse becomes Ulrika Hesse. Fräulein Pabst becomes Fräulein Pfaff, quite say that properly, but I'm doing my best. Emma Rauchheld becomes Emma Bergman. Meta Strasser becomes Waldstrasser. Meta Veldort becomes Minna Blum. Paula Schmidt becomes Elsa Spear, and the Johnstons become the Martins, the two sisters. So she is very much kind of you know, writing it as if it's a memory that she's transcribing, apart from obviously with the license of her impressionism and her artfulness and, you know, the different period of time that it's set and, you know, changing the order of events, probably leaving a lot of stuff out, maybe putting some stuff in, but she's thinking about these characters as real people and the places as real places, and then just lightly fictionizing the names afterwards. And I think that's interesting. Um, just very quickly, a couple of what other people have said about Dorothy Richardson and what she said about herself. So some of this is on the Reading Pilgrimage website anyway. I've kind of called it from the letters, all of the files of the letters, which Scott is going to be publishing very, very soon, I believe. So start saving your pennies now. But I mean, really, start saving your pennies. But the first one's a letter from Richardson to Josephine K. Piercy. And it's good because she's been asked about her method, right? What is your method? How did it come to you? How did you decide to write in the way that you write? She claims it's an accident in a way, and almost an accident. And so far as my method came to me innocently and took me by surprise, it is my own. Setting out to present at the beginning of Pointed Roofs, the girl Miriam going upstairs. I was, as far as I know, ready to supply descriptive information about her and her family. But I found it immediately impossible to step aside for the purpose of chatting with the reader. I realised the restrictions involved in this sacrifice and also what was to be gained thereby in vividness of presentation. It is the pursuit of this clue that gives some of my work the quality of scenes thrown on screen and caused it to be called first kaleidoscopic and later cinematographical. Which a lot of people did say in their reviews of her, right? So she's responding to critic indirectly in that. And elsewhere in Everyman, in a kind of interview column called How Writers Work, she says, but who was there to describe her? As in Miriam, it came to me suddenly. It was an extraordinary moment when I realised what could and could not be done. So she kind of, you're never quite sure with Richardson how much is genuine and disingenuous in what she says in these kinds of interviews and in these letters, right? So it was an accident. I just kind of realised it. I worked it out as I was going along. I was ready to do description in that kind of more traditional sense, but then realised that it would sacrifice some things. That I didn't want to sacrifice, but also that it gave me, extra methods of illumination into Miriam's character. I think I more or
And we
less.
can just, if I can just make a comment on this slide, because that, calling her method cinematographical, that's a
Mhm,
mouthful. We'll all
mhm,
practice that for next time. Um, what immediately struck me is I've been doing a lot of watching and studying of film between the late silent and the early talkie period. And one of the holdovers from silent to talkies was the use of intertitles, particularly sort of structural landmark or a milestone titles like later the same day or at the nightclub will come up as a silent intertitle before you see the scene. And Richardson, in fact, throws all of those. I mean, there are no inter. So, in some ways, I think kaleidoscopic is a better description, a more accurate
mhm.
description than cinematographic, because unless it's a movie with no intertitles whatsoever. Yeah.
Yes, and of
Meanwhile, back
course,
at the ranch is a great example.
yeah, yeah, and of course, she loved silent film, and she wrote about intertitles and the way in which they could give enough information without giving too much information. So she felt that the sparser the intertitle was, the better. Harriet Ragg wrote an article about Richardson and intertitles for the Pilgrimages Journal, which
Okay.
you can access. It's on JSTOR, but it's also, I think, still open access on the Pilgrimages website. Um, so that's worth a read.
Yes, absolutely.
Really, really interesting stuff. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. She will give the bare minimum of description. We know that Miriam's on the stairs at the very beginning of Pointed Roofs, right? We've got that much. But where is she going? The stairs where? What is she doing? And that we have to just work out as we go along. Um, she tells other people to do this as well. So Percy Beaumont Wadsworth, who she writes to quite a lot, he is a younger writer and he's writing to her specifically asking for advice. So they have a very cute relationship in which he's specifically seeking her advice as a mentor figure. And he sends her some of his work. Which is always a bit of a brave thing to do, I think, with authors. But in this case, she does read it and gives him some feedback. And her criticism of his work is that it is not that it's too descriptive. So she says, in the treatment of your material, there is one thing you have not yet fully faced. The question of how far you intend in your presentation to limit yourself to the knowledge and experience of Bernard, which is his character. At present, you and Bernard are telling the tale between you. If you want to achieve full current reality as you go along, you must accept his limitations. That does not mean that you need limit yourself to his vocabulary in portraying things seen by him, but you must not see more than he saw, nor be all round what he saw. It spells poverty in all directions but one. It excludes absolutely any information given by you, the author, in its own right, any commentary or conclusive statement on your part with regard to scenes and conversations he registered and memorizes, but without relating them to any imagined whole. The imagined whole is there in your own mind, clearly and coherently, but it must not come neatly from him. And I love that because even though she's ostensibly talking about his writing and about the way he's portraying his character, this for me is the fullest explanation of her own method that she gives. Um, the other one is where she says she speaks of Henry James in a few places and in similar ways. Um, Henry James keeping the reader incessantly watching the conflict of human forces through the eye of a single observer, rather than taking him before the drama begins upon the tour amongst the properties. Again, speaking of somebody else, but describing really what she admires in James by way of explaining what she's trying to do herself. And that's in the foreword to Pilgrimage, which is available as part of the Virago edition, but I think you can find elsewhere as well. So then, by way of just kind of setting us up to think, and I'm hoping general discussion after this, um, I wanted to think about the ways in which the restrictions of her method actually enable her to do all sorts of things, and especially in Pointed Roofs, because, you know, as the first chapter volume of what we know is going to go on to be a 13 chapter volume, very long novel, you know, we're being set up with this character, we're being set up with her family, we need to know who she is, what she's doing, what she thinks about the world, and we need to know this if we're going to stick with her for the rest of the series. But it's not so simple because Richardson can't tell us various things. So, firstly, we have Miriam and her sense of herself changing. So, the version of Miriam at the very beginning in Pointed Roofs is relatively narrow, prejudiced inexperience. The prejudice that we see, right, in her trying to weigh up how German women are different from English women, and in that she's biased against German women and English women, actually, women in general,
Right.
and men in general, and people, just people broadly. Um, but we're also only given what Miriam knows at any one point. So we get incomplete knowledge. You know, the author must not be all round. We must only get what Bernard knows, as she tells Wadsworth. So we only get what Miriam knows. And just to kind of finish with an example of this from Pointed Roofs, and there's a couple of them with Pastor Larman. But this is when they're driving home from one of their excursions. Miriam looked again and again at Pastor Larman sitting almost opposite to her next to Fräulein Pfaff. She could look at him more easily than at either of the girls. She felt that only he could feel the beauty of the evening exactly as she did. Several times she met and quietly contemplated his dark eyes. She felt that there was someone in those eyes who was neither tiresome nor tame. She was looking at someone to whom those boys and that dead wife were nothing. At first he had met her eyes formally, then with obvious embarrassment, and at last simply and gravely. She felt easy and happy in this communion. Dimly she was conscious that it sustained her, it gave her, sorry that's my typo, it gave her dignity and poise. She thought that its meaning must, if she observed it at all, be quite obvious to Fräulein and must reveal her to her. Presently her eyes were drawn to meet Fräulein's, and she read there a disgust and loathing such as she had never seen. The woods receded, the beauty drops out of them. Now, most readers, I think, any canny readers, are reading this and thinking, for God's sake, Miriam, Fräulein is looking at you and thinking you are flirting with Pastor Larman and that this is inappropriate, you know, in this carriage full of the schoolgirls that you teach. Stop, you know, stop making eye contact with this man in this very obvious way. And Miriam's oblivious. She's oblivious. But the way that it's written is so clever in terms of giving the reader the information that we need in order to work out actually what's going on and what the Fräulein is making of this situation, whilst at the same time Miriam is, you know, not really processing it.
Right. Right.
We have her thought
And that
processes
and
on.
it ends up sort of being the dramatic crux of how this particular chapter volume gets resolved in terms of her,
Mhm,
leaving the school in the end.
yeah. Yes. That's the slides that I've got. I wanna
Okay.
just kind of hear from you guys, really. I want to know what you think. Some of you I know have done the reading group before. Some of you I know have not. I wonder if there are differences between the ways that people are reading pointed proofs. Can I call on
Okay,
people, Brett?
we have Richard and then Phyllis.
Yeah, I was kind of on team Layman or Laman through the um, book, and I kept thinking if this were a 19th century novel, because Villette is this. By the way, this is the first time I hadn't even heard of her until this group came up. So this is absolutely the first time. I didn't know anything going in, and I just love kind of this hothouse atmosphere that Miriam's been thrown into in Germany with all these girls and how observant she is. But I kept thinking, like in Villette, the main character kind of falls for this professorial figure who, at the end, seems to drown. I wasn't ever quite sure what exactly was going on there. I need to look it up, but in other words, but that's not happening here at all. She's moving on. She's not going, and it was just fascinating how she kind of is so physically attracted to this guy when her feelings towards the church or churches are at best ambiguous and not out and out hostile. Um, but yeah, it was fascinating how it just simply does not go the way that one would expect it to go with the
Mm,
pastor. And
mm,
she also, it's really fascinating how she just blows hot and cold on people. And sometimes according to how she's perceiving them perceiving her, particularly Fraulein. Oh, she likes me. Oh, she doesn't like me. Oh, and then out of the blue, she just like, okay, the Fraulein's like, okay, we're enough with this men. I'm like, wait, where was that? Where was that? It was like that one kind of half paragraph where it's talking about how the girls had crushes on people. Yeah, and at the point you're like, okay, Miriam's right, the Fraulein is crazy. But yeah, it was just really, really interesting and how she experiences things, particularly music, sensually. And she goes into that. Yeah, yeah, I quite enjoyed it.
Yeah,
it's
well,
yeah.
and I mean, not just blowing hot and cold on other people. She's constantly blowing hot and cold on herself.
Mhm.
You know, in the course of a page, she's sort of on. She pats herself on the back, and then she says, "Oh, I'm terrible. This is terrible. I can never do this." And that sort of hot and cold uh, to me is so accurate with a young I mean, at 68, I still experience that on a regular basis, but especially the teenage mind and emotions reacting in such a fluctuating manner is it's sort of a contrast with Villette. So we're mentioning Charlotte Bronte's novel Villette, where Lucy Snow, sort of a Miriam Henderson parallel in the sense that she goes to what is a fictional version of Brussels and teaches in a Belgian school for girls, and much more of a structured and very much more traditional novel, except for one point that I wanted to mention, which is the one thing that puts Lucy Snow on guard most in Villette is the horrible, evil Catholic Church, whereas Miriam is just anti all churches as a point of contrast. But let's hear from Phyllis and then Joe.
Oh, okay, Rebecca, hello again, and thank you. Every time I read this and hear this, I learn more. So this is my third time through, and Brad, your edition for me is also my third time through, but your edition for me was so much easier to read. I mean, the
Thank you.
numbered sections and the typography and the paper. I mean, the whole thing was a different experience, and it's nice it coincided with my third time through. So my first time through, I was pulling first editions out of the Cal Berkeley library because I was too cheap to buy the Virago, and those were pretty rough. And I was also, it was a novel a month, so I was just getting through it in time for the next meeting. And then the second time, we'll get into it later. Karen and I I've been going much more leisurely. This time I started reading the first sentence and I said, oh my God, this is the whole book. I mean, I go through the gaslit hall. She's going somewhere. She's upstairs. There's March twilight. There's landings, um, the curtained recesses, her lonely pilgrimage to the West End. Then all the jokes about English grammar and whether they talk slang or not. And it just goes on and on that things just popped out at me that I'd seen coming, the English and the women, and is she her father's son or her mother's daughter or vice versa. So it just really, I mean, this is going too far, but I'm going to go too far. It's almost like stately, plump Buck Mulligan. I mean, the beginning of it just kind of just blew me away. So that's just me being a fangirl. But I wanted to say to Rebecca about narration. I'm much more sensitive about what she's doing with narration. And near the end, there's a couple parts, and I'm using your pagination, Brad. I'm not sure what we're using for the discussion today, but near the end, we have Fraulein looks like a dead body, thought Miriam, and she's doing quotes around her thoughts. And she also has a quote where she says something out loud in quotes and then quotes thoughts right after she said that out loud. And I don't mean to be down in the weeds, but I'd just love to think about your reaction to that whole narrative, the holding control of the narrative, but sort of challenging it while you're controlling it and yet not revealing your tricks. And that quote that you quoted in that letter is awesome. That was a wonderful summation of her approach. Anyway, that's all.
She plays about with that though, doesn't she? And sometimes things are reported and sometimes they're not reported, and sometimes, most often, she's third person and everything's being filtered through Miriam's mind with that third person free and direct discourse. Sometimes it's second person. There's occasional little first person eyes crop up every now and then.
Yep. I also
on my
noticed that
first reading I didn't notice, and then on the second reading I went, whoa, hang
yeah,
on.
yeah. And I noticed
Right.
too in this one, and I didn't really document that much, but I noticed that she would say sometimes she thought to herself. I mean, she actually, instead of trusting us to know that she's thinking to herself, and maybe not trusting herself. And I don't remember that as much in the later books, but I'm going to keep an eye out for that because it seems like she gets more comfortable with that ambiguous role. Yeah. But thanks. This is really
That's
fun.
a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Next we have Joe
Hi,
and
thank
Rebecca
you.
and
This
Karen.
is my first time, and this is a real joy and always a pleasure to listen to Becky speak. So thank you for that. I was wondering, with Miriam's position, how much that had perhaps been influenced by her father's financial fall, and whether the family had acquired some negative attention which made her more self-conscious, because she seems to be very very close to her sisters who would have gone through the same experience, but when she is wondering how she appears to other people, and with the music as well, she was very surprised at the German girls being able to play the piano so freely and so openly when she was been encouraged to be more cautious. So I just wondered what others thought, whether her father's financial position had encouraged her to be a little more guarded in the presence of others.
I think that's something that you see playing out in her position in the school in particular, because it's a confusing position to be in, because she's an employee, but she's in charge of the girls, so she is in a position of responsibility towards them and above them. The Fräulein also puts her in a position of responsibility to the servants. So there's the very weird scene that, I think,
Oh
I
yeah.
remember thinking, I don't really understand what the problem is here either. So, you can identify again with Miriam, because you think, I don't know what they're asking of you. But the servant isn't clearing the soup plates in the correct way. And the Fräulein expects her to correct the servant's behavior because she is middle class and so must know how this is done. but she thinks, well, that's not my job, it's your job to train the servant. But she doesn't know how she fits into the structure, because it is a very weird place to be. And previously she's been served by servants, but in the position of the daughter of a household of a middle class family. So she's very uncertain. I don't think it's just that, though. I think Miriam just is very socially awkward in a lot of different ways, and that's why she thinks about Villette. So when she's first teaching, she's not taught before, and she thinks, how is teaching done? I know, let me just conjure Villette as my model for
Right,
how this is
right.
done, because she's experiencing the world through her reading. For everything that she hasn't done before, she's trying to look for a model of how to behave, and because she hasn't seen it, she has to, and she thinks back to her old teachers as well, but she had a very odd, quite a liberal education, so it doesn't quite fit as a model for what she's doing.
And we actually do learn a fair amount about the school that she's gone to because of her reflections about the contrast that Fraulein Pfaff seems to be so laissez-faire about actually expecting any instruction to be done. The other comment I would make is that very early on at the school, Miriam has this panic where she thinks, well, maybe I can stay on as a servant, despite the fact that we then discover she actually has no experience of what, and she's never, I mean, she's been in the kitchen like once or twice. So she knows nothing about cooking. She doesn't understand that. And as you say, I mean, in her position, in her own family, she would not have been one to be a judge of the performance of the family servants. That was her mother and father's job. So I mean, another example of how much is going on there. Uh, let's get to Rebecca. We got three hands raised at the moment. So Rebecca first.
Oh, hi. I'd like to apologise first for being late. I had a clash of meetings. Um, I first read Pointed Roofs when I was about Miriam's age, and I must say that at that point I was really sort of focused on what it was like to be teaching abroad and how difficult that was, and I was really feeling for her. I think this time, those scenes with Pastor Larman really stood out for me. I mean, not just that one you were discussing there, but there was one earlier on where the Fraulein was obviously thinking, oh, I'm not quite sure what's going on here. I'm trying to separate them. And Miriam just hadn't noticed. But I was reading that in the context of that review that you shared, where the reviewer was going, well, there isn't any romance in this. How can this be a novel? The woman isn't doing a romantic thing. And I thought
Where is the plot?
exactly. I thought that's really interesting because actually, if you put her not just in the setting of Villette, where she puts herself, but if you put her in the setting, say, of a Jane Austen novel, there she is. She's a middle class family, and suddenly they're ruined, and she's got to find a place in the world. And really, she ought to be doing that through a relationship with a man because that's what everybody does. And Wilkie Collins has some novels like that as well, where these middle class girls are suddenly thrust at about this age into well, what are you going to do? And it's as if Dorothy Richardson sort of flirts with the idea of perhaps she's going to get into a relationship. Everybody else is talking about relationships. Her sister's going to get married. Mademoiselle is going to get married. Even the girls at school who aren't supposed to be talking to boys are pairing up. And then Miriam has these possibilities. There's just the undergraduate with the dueling scar comes up and would like to dance with them as Pastor Layman. And she's just it's just she doesn't notice at all, and she's off to do something else. And I think that's the sort of way of Dorothy Richardson symbolizing, not only am I writing this in a different way, it is a completely different sort of novel, and just throw out your expectations of what women central characters in novels do, because that's not what Miriam's doing.
Yeah, I
That's a good point. I
I
mean,
think in
from
Truth she's still
go
a
ahead.
little bit sorry, she's still a little bit unsure as to what she wants, because she is aware of Pastor Larman in that first scene that you're referring to, the one where he takes her glasses off. At the beginning, she kind of thinks, again, it's that, that moment of powerlessness. So suddenly I can't really see, and she's extremely myopic. She's very, very blind, so it's a big deal. And she sees him at first as there's a phrase, something like a black-coated authority going to help her. So she sees him as a doctor figure, and she thinks, "Oh, this is good. I surrender myself to the person who knows how to help." But there's also, she thinks about German gardens, and could she be a German wife, and could she live in that kind of, she flirts with the idea, but then thinks no. But also, when she reads about Harriet getting married, the phrase that she uses there, I think, is really interesting. She says Harriet had succeeded, as if it was,
Mm.
as if she was in the same race. But she isn't. So I think she's still trying to work out, and for a while
Mm.
she's still working that out as well. But she's not decided one way or another necessarily,
Yeah.
but we can probably see that it's not
No,
going to
I think
happen.
it's reflective of what a lot of people experience, which is, it's extraordinary. In my opinion, it's extraordinary when somebody finds something that, and they say to themselves, "Yes, this is what I want to do," because I think many of us find that, especially in the teenage, early adult years, we're going, "No, I don't want to do that." I don't know what I want, but I know I don't want that, and that's what we're seeing through
Mm.
Miriam's eyes, uh, through much of the book. Really, is
Mm.
this isn't make it, this isn't me. I don't know what me is, but it's not this. So let's hear from Karen and then Lisa, and we'll wrap it up.
Well, I think you're a
Oh, and
mind
Ryan.
reader. I think you're a mind reader, Brad, because that was exactly what I was going to pick up on. Because Becky, it was really resonant when you made that comment in your talk, and you said Miriam's concerned all the way through about how others are seeing her. And of course, it's that reciprocal vision, isn't it? Because it's constantly how she's seeing others. And could, what you were just saying, Brad, that's what I was going to talk about. Could I be this? Could I be a teacher? Am I a teacher? Am I good enough to be a teacher? And that resonated for me this time. Previous Rebecca, who was speaking, mentioned the reviews. And there's a sentence in one of the reviews, I think it's the first one that you provided, Brad. The book somehow reads as if the reader doesn't exist. So there's all this kind of, I'm sussing out others in the book, they're sussing out me. But the book itself, this new type of writing where there's no address, dear reader, pray reader, think this, it's written as if the reader doesn't exist. And that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition of what's going on inside it and the relationship of the book to the reader. So I just wanted to mention that. But also, I thought the reviews were really great to read again. I don't know if I read them fully before, if they're new this time around, Brad, but especially that one which sort of talks about her like she's got major mental health problems, and that's what the book is about. I mean, it's fascinating just to read those 4 reviews and see how very differently different readers responded to her and to Richardson and the writing. And in a way, that's a kind of meta example of what's going on inside the book too. So yeah, just a few thoughts there. And also the word kaleidoscope, which is a word that I've been using going through the books more slowly. There are a lot of moments where it is very kaleidoscopic. So it was interesting to see that Richardson herself had used that word in the letter to capture that. And, you said, Becky, that sometimes it's hard to know how arch she's being in a way, or what she's doing. And I wonder if she's throwing that word in partly to encourage people to recognize something that she's actually doing consciously in the book. So yeah, few thoughts there.
And or throwing
Okay.
people off the train of the stream of consciousness, which she was quite keen to disavow, right? So sending people away from that towards something else.
Yes, and I'm feeling our discussion tonight is naturally very kaleidoscopic too. It's like we've got a few fragments and they come together in this way and then they come together another way. And it's like, how can you talk about pilgrimage without it being like that? Because there's so much in there and there's so
Yeah.
many things. I mean, we could be talking about a pastry and then suddenly we're talking about her quest to be the person she wants to be. I mean, it's like it's everything.
Right. Absolutely. Let's hear from Lisa and then Ray Ryan.
The kaleidoscopic metaphor is a great segue into my question or observation. I'm reading the old Virago edition, and on page 44, I was just so struck by the scene when Clara's playing the piano, and then suddenly Miriam remembers this scene from childhood, a scene in Devonshire that she hadn't thought of probably since childhood. And she's struck with the beauty of that. And it's like a transcendent joy. And to me, that harkened back to Proust's involuntary memory with the Madeleine and the Tilleul. And then also that kind of ecstasy or joy or whatever reminds me also of a lot of the threads running through the works of Virginia Woolf. And I was just wondering, like, I know that they were born around the same time, Woolf a little, maybe a decade later, but just how much were they influenced by each other? And I'm curious to know whether we'll have, I suspect we will have more of this ecstatic joy as we go through. This is my first reading, so I have a lot to look forward to. Thank you.
Just to clarify, this is the scene where she suddenly remembers being in the garden as a child,
Um,
and I think it's referred to as the buzzing. She doesn't talk about the bees, right?
No, no, it's the water wheel, isn't it? It's the water wheel.
yes,
Oh,
yes,
Oh, okay, yeah.
the water wheel in Devonshire, yes. And she sees, yes, it's just a cool breeze and the low humming of the water wheel. And it's just suffused with this transcendent joy is the only way I can think of to describe it. And I just found that fascinating because, yeah, it reminded me of Proust, and I notice it a lot in Virginia Woolf, but it's not often that I've run across it in literature in my very limited readings.
she said of Virginia Woolf that she very much respected Virginia Woolf's method, but she thought that she was a distanced writer. So she said that Virginia Woolf looked down from a balcony through a lorgnette at her subject. So this idea that she's kind of perched above and she's kind of peering down at the thing that she's describing, which we can, is that fair? Is that not, Proust, she was reading in the 1920s voraciously. So her friend Briar was getting her copies of Proust and she was just ripping through them literally. So, leaving the volumes all around the house, cutting them up, reading whichever bit she happened on at that time, reading them all out of order. And then people, writing her letters saying, "What are you reading right now?" And she's responding, "Proust, Proust, 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 Proust." So very, but not until after she's written this, right? So, but I think
Yeah.
she sensed a kinship in Proust in particular.
That's so interesting. So did Proust, do you know if he read her?
Scott's
Seriously
shaking his
don't.
No, he
head.
didn't. He didn't, and we don't know if Joyce read her either. Possibly he was delivered a volume, but there's no evidence that either of them knew of her work.
That's so interesting because it's almost like she got there first with this.
Proust got there first, I think, if you look at
Yeah.
the writing. But it's interesting that in three different countries, England, Ireland, and France, they all this style and these long novels all emerge at the same time. And then you've got, Thomas Mann in Germany. It's a very interesting phenomenon.
Thank you.
Let's hear from Ray.
Hi,
Ray
this is
Ryan.
actually Jennifer here, his wife.
Okay.
And this is my second reading. We're listening together. The first time I read this, first volume, I was kind of in almost a rapture. Not, I mean, that's too strong, but I was just so excited to be in this young woman's brain, experiencing what she experienced, written by a woman who was older, right? She's remembering back to her 17-year-old self. And it was so much fun. And I had been rereading or reading some of the authors we had talked about, especially during the pandemic, Proust and Joyce. And she has such a female voice, and she has such a teenage voice in this novel that it's just, and this time too, it's just a delightful read, kind of a wonderful contrast to the others that finally there's a female voice, even starting at the age of 17. So, yeah, it's a great read, and I love everyone's comments.
That's terrific, and that's why you're touching on a point why I believe that for a man to read Pilgrimage is such a healthy corrective exercise in spending 2,000 plus pages seeing the world through the eyes of a woman who was so unapologetically female, doggedly female in her perspective. You just don't get that, and it to me it was an eye-opening experience. And I have to say, this is a pilgrimage, or Pointed Roofs, I think, is a great entry to the series because you're just from page one, you're there, and you have to adapt to what Richardson wants to do with her narrative. And once you do, then you become very attuned to how much is going on, and realize that I'm not going to get it all in the first go or the second go or the third or maybe ever, but that's what makes it a great book.
Yeah.
So we're after we've gone over our hour. We're going to try to stick to discipline as much as possible, even though that's very un-Richardsonian, I guess, in manner. But any last comments or questions that folks want to bring up before we wrap up? Okay, from Lindsay.
Just kind of procedural question. Will there be any format with which we can discuss amongst each other after hours, so to speak? I mean, do we just go onto the YouTube
Yeah.
comment and kind of go off, but just didn't know whether or not that was something you did in the previous group or and thank you.
We
Actually, thank you.
didn't.
This is an amazing thing. You just can't believe how stoked and nerd heaven I'm in. Never heard of this novel before. Completely chance that I hopped onto this group and I'm just over the moon. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much for those comments. Um, I had not the first time around, we didn't open up a discussion forum on the website. If there is an interest in that, it's just a matter of administration, doing a little tweaking on WordPress and making that available if folks are going to take advantage of it. So I'm open to it. It's just something that wasn't demand. It didn't seem to be a demand for. And it looks like we're getting a few thumbs up out there. So I will look into turning that on. And I think last we have a thumbs up for or a hand up from Ned.
Yeah, just to end with a trivial pursuit question. So if Miriam's nickname is Henshin, what was Dorothy Richardson's nickname, I wonder?
That would be nice to know, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm.
It's not so obvious, compared to, I mean, Henshin is a nice, obvious way of, changing it. But I just wonder she must have had a nickname because that presumably is what made her think of Henshin.
That's one of the things that you can never know, but wouldn't it be wonderful to go back in time and find out? We don't have any
Well,
letters
probably,
that
that's
far back. So.
that sort of affectionate diminutive is definitely a feature of German and other languages. So we'll have to ask a native speaker what they would be inclined to offer for Richardson.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah.
Of course, a lot of times you'll see her referred to by her sisters as Miri. Um, but yeah, the Germans
But the girls would only,
might
I
have
think,
done
really
something
knew
creative.
her as the girls only knew her as Miss Henderson, I think. So
Right,
In
yeah,
March
right.
Moonlight, there's a character who refers to Miriam as Dickie. And this is a bit confusing because obviously Dickie would be a short version of Richardson, Richard Dickie. But she leaves it in. March Moonlight was not finished, and it was published before she kind of, finished it to her liking, whatever that might have looked like. So she might have been intending to cross that out and replace it with something else, but it remains Dickie in March Moonlight. So maybe it was Dickie in Pointed Roofs as well. I don't know if that would make sense to a
Yeah,
German school.
just a note that we have a comment in the chat that the girls also call her Hendy. So Henshin and
mm,
Hendy are two
mm,
variants. Okay, just to finish up, we have say that uh, we're moving on next month or this month in February. Get your reading done of Backwater, where Miriam once again is taking a teaching position, but a school in North London. And our special guest for our next session will be Annika Lindskog coming to us from Sweden. So we're starting our global tour of Richardson scholars, and we'll hope to have more joining us. And we have a few non-scholars, but a couple of writers who just happen to love Richardson and pilgrimage will be joining us later in this year. So thank you very much for joining us for this discussion. I hope you found it worthwhile. I will let everyone know when the video is available on YouTube. And in the meantime, enjoy your reading. There's many more volumes to come, and if you've made it past Pointed Roofs, you're going to have great things to look forward to. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next month.